There are moments in history that unfold in public, on battlefields, in courts, before crowds, and then there are moments that happen in silence, behind closed doors, where no eyes bear witness and no applause follows. It was in such a moment that one of the greatest tests of character in human history took place. A young man stood inside a palace chamber, far from his homeland, far from his father, and far from anyone who could defend him. The doors were shut, the air was still, and the trial had begun. This was not a battlefield of swords or armies. It was a battlefield of the soul. On one side stood power, beauty, and opportunity. On the other stood conscience, faith, and the unseen awareness of Allah. The woman who had authority over the household had carefully arranged the moment. Privacy had been secured. The noise of the palace faded into the background. Everything about the setting suggested secrecy and safety from consequence. But what makes a test truly great is not how many people see it. It is who sees it when no one else does. Prophet Yusuf, A.S., was not unaware of his surroundings. He understood the danger of the situation. He was young, he was alone. He was a servant in a land not his own. The imbalance of power was real. Refusal could mean punishment. Compliance could mean comfort and elevation. From a worldly perspective, the path of least resistance was clear. Yet the heart of a believer does not calculate the way the world calculates. Behind those closed doors, another presence was felt, not seen, not heard, but known with certainty. The presence of the one who sees what is hidden and hears what is whispered. In that silent room, the real audience was not the walls, nor the palace guards, nor the society of Egypt. The real audience was Allah. Temptation is strongest when it appears private, when consequences seem distant, when justification feels easy, when the mind begins to whisper, "No one will know." But faith transforms isolation into accountability. It turns secrecy into consciousness. It replaces fear of people with fear of the Creator. For Yusuf, A.S., this was not merely a test of desire, it was a test of identity. Who was he when no one was watching? Was he a victim of circumstance, shaped by betrayal and displacement? Or was he a servant of Allah, shaped by revelation and trust? The silence in that room was heavy. A single decision would determine the direction of his life. A single moment could either blur his prophetic honor or elevate it beyond imagination. History often remembers grand victories, but rarely does it pause to consider that some of the greatest triumphs occur within the human heart. This was one of those triumphs waiting to unfold. The door had been locked from the outside, but the greater lock was internal. The lock of taqwa, the shield of awareness, the guard of a heart anchored in faith. The world offered secrecy. Allah offered nearness. The world offered immediate pleasure. Allah offered eternal honor. And so, behind closed doors, the true story was not about temptation alone. It was about the kind of man who chooses integrity when compromise seems easy. It was about the unseen struggle that defines true righteousness. To understand how Yusuf, A.S., reached such strength in that decisive moment, we must return to the beginning, to the well, to the betrayal, and to the journey that shaped his heart long before this night ever arrived. Long before the palace doors were closed and the silence of temptation surrounded him, another silence had once enveloped Prophet Yusuf, A.S. It was the silence at the bottom of a well, dark, cold, and abandoned. The journey to that palace chamber did not begin with comfort or privilege. It began with jealousy, betrayal, and a child separated from his father's embrace. As a young boy, Yusuf, A.S., had seen a dream, one that hinted at a future of honor and elevation. But dreams of light often provoke shadows in the hearts of others. His brothers, unable to bear the affection their father showed him, allowed envy to grow unchecked. Envy rarely announces itself loudly. It grows quietly until it convinces a person that removing another is the only path to relief. And so, under the open sky of Canaan, they conspired against their own blood. When Yusuf, A.S., was lowered into that well, he did not know how long he would remain there. He did not know whether rescue would come. The betrayal was personal, and the isolation was absolute. Yet even in that darkness, divine protection surrounded him. The same Lord who would later test him in privacy was already shaping him in obscurity. The well was not abandonment. It was preparation. From that well, he was taken as merchandise, sold into slavery in a foreign land. The humiliation of being treated as property could have hardened his heart. The memory of betrayal could have poisoned his character. But trials do not automatically corrupt a person. They reveal what is rooted within. Yusuf, A.S., carried within him not bitterness but trust, not resentment but patience. He entered Egypt not as a prince but as a servant. The palace that would one day witness his greatest moral test first received him as a young slave. Yet even in servitude, something about him stood out. Integrity does not depend on status. Nobility does not wait for recognition. In the house of his master, Yusuf, A.S., displayed honesty, discipline, and excellence. These were not performances for reward. They were reflections of an inner alignment with Allah. The household observed him. Trust began to grow. Responsibilities increased. With time, the boy from the well rose to a position of confidence within the palace walls. Externally, it appeared as a rise in fortune. Internally, it was the steady unfolding of divine wisdom. Allah was elevating him step by step, not through comfort alone, but through resilience. Hardship has a way of stripping away illusions. It teaches a person where reliance truly belongs. Yusuf, A.S., had already tasted betrayal, displacement, and vulnerability. By the time he stood in the palace, he was not naive about the world. He understood its instability. He knew how quickly circumstances could change. That awareness became a shield against arrogance and a reminder that honor does not come from people. It comes from Allah. The palace was magnificent. Its corridors echoed with authority and wealth. Its chambers carried the scent of power. Yet beneath the grandeur lay the same human weaknesses that exist everywhere: desire, pride, insecurity. The environment was not spiritually neutral. It required vigilance. The boy who once looked up from the bottom of a well had learned that isolation does not mean abandonment. He had learned that injustice does not cancel destiny. Most importantly, he had learned that Allah's plan moves quietly through events that seem chaotic. Each trial had carved strength into his character. Each hardship had deepened his reliance. And now, as he stood in the palace years later, that preparation was about to be tested in a way more subtle than betrayal and more dangerous than slavery. The well had tested his patience. The palace would test his purity. To understand the weight of the moment behind those closed doors, we must now enter the chamber itself, where the real battle would not be against brothers or chains, but against the whisperings of desire and the pressure of power. The chamber was quiet, but the silence carried weight. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence before a decision. The doors had been secured. The corridors outside no longer echoed with movement. Within that confined space stood two individuals, but the true conflict was not between them. It was within the heart of Prophet Yusuf, A.S. Temptation rarely announces itself as destruction. It presents itself as an opportunity. It disguises itself as affection, advancement, relief from loneliness. In that room, power stood on one side: social status, authority, influence. Refusal carried risk. Acceptance promised comfort and protection. For a young man in a foreign land, without family or tribe to defend him, the calculation could have been simple. But faith changes the calculation. Yusuf, A.S., was human. The Quran does not portray him as emotionless or detached from reality. He was young, and youth carries natural impulses. He lived in a palace of beauty and refinement. He was not unaware of attraction, nor was he incapable of desire. The test was real, precisely because he was real. What elevates him is not the absence of human inclination, but the mastery of it. Psychological pressure works subtly. The mind begins to rationalize. This is private. No one will know. You deserve some comfort after all you have endured. The ego whispers survival logic. Protect your position, avoid conflict, secure your future. In moments of isolation, the absence of witnesses can feel like permission. Yet there is a deeper voice that only the believer hears clearly. The voice of conscience rooted in awareness of Allah. Behind those closed doors, the real question was not whether he could escape unnoticed. The real question was whether he could stand before his Lord with a clear heart. When the world narrows into a single private moment, identity is tested. Who are you when no one else sees? Who do you fear losing more, the favor of people or the pleasure of Allah? The power imbalance in that room intensified the trial. She was not merely an individual expressing desire, she was the wife of his master. Her words carried authority. Her influence could shape his future in Egypt. Compliance might secure his status permanently. Refusal could trigger retaliation. The pressure was not only emotional, it was political. Temptation combined with fear is a powerful force. It pushes a person to seek immediate safety, even if it means long-term regret. But taqwa introduces a different awareness. The unseen is more real than the seen. The pleasure of Allah outweighs the approval of creation. The consequences of a hidden act extend beyond the moment. In that chamber, Yusuf, A.S., stood at the intersection of two paths. One path promised secrecy and immediate advantage. The other promised difficulty, uncertainty, and potential loss. The first path appealed to impulse. The second appealed to faith. True righteousness is not proven in public worship alone. It is proven in private restraint. Anyone can appear disciplined when observed. Few remain disciplined when unseen. The greatness of Yusuf, A.S., lies in that unseen resistance, the battle that history cannot fully record, but that Allah fully witnessed. The walls of the palace were witnesses only to sound and movement, but the heavens bore witness to intention. And in that suspended moment, before any words were spoken, before any action was taken, the decisive battle was fought within the heart. The next words that would leave his lips would not merely respond to a proposal, they would define his legacy for generations to come. In that suspended moment, when pressure tightened and the path of compromise seemed easiest, Prophet Yusuf, A.S., did not begin with an argument. He did not begin with accusation. He began with refuge. His first response was not strategy, it was remembrance. I seek refuge in Allah. With those words, the entire direction of the moment changed. Seeking refuge is more than speech. It is a declaration of allegiance. It is the heart turning toward its Lord before the body takes a step. In that chamber, Yusuf, A.S., anchored himself to the one who never abandons those who rely upon him. The doors may have been locked by human hands, but divine awareness cannot be locked out. By invoking Allah, he shifted the center of gravity in that room from desire to accountability. He did not deny reality. He did not pretend the situation carried no weight. Instead, he acknowledged a higher loyalty. Indeed, he is my master who has made my stay honorable. In those words was gratitude, integrity, and recognition of trust. Even in slavery, he refused betrayal. Even under pressure, he refused disloyalty. His moral framework did not bend according to circumstance. The temptation offered him secrecy. Faith reminded him of the unseen record. The temptation offered him advancement. Faith reminded him of eternal consequence. Between these two perspectives, Yusuf A.S. chose the one that extended beyond the moment. There is a profound strength in fearing Allah when one could easily fear people. He understood the authority she held over him. He knew refusal might lead to punishment. But fear of creation has limits. Fear of the Creator reshapes priorities. It teaches a person that losing status is lighter than losing integrity. The greatness of this choice lies not in dramatic display but in quiet firmness. No audience applauded him. No companion stood beside him in support. It was a solitary stand, yet it was stronger than any army because it was rooted in conviction. When he turned away, he was not merely escaping a situation. He was affirming who he was. He was affirming that identity is not dictated by the environment. A slave in a palace can still be a servant of Allah first. A young man surrounded by power can still uphold principle. Circumstance does not define character, choice does. And yet, choosing righteousness does not guarantee immediate relief. The world does not always reward integrity quickly. Sometimes standing for truth triggers backlash. Yusuf A.S. understood that the cost of refusal might be high, but he weighed that cost against something greater, the cost of disobedience before Allah. This was the defining moment, not because it altered palace politics immediately, but because it crystallized his legacy. Prophethood is not only about revelation and miracles, it is about moral leadership. It is about demonstrating that self-restraint is possible even when desire is accessible. His refusal was calm, but it was absolute. No negotiation, no hidden compromise, just clarity. The room that had been arranged for secrecy became a witness to sincerity. The pressure that was meant to weaken him exposed the strength within him. When the door finally opened again, the external world would see only fragments of what occurred. Accusations would follow, misunderstandings would spread. But Allah had already recorded the most important reality, a servant who chose him over all else. And soon, the consequences of that choice would unfold in ways no one in that chamber could have anticipated. Righteous choices do not always lead to immediate relief. Sometimes they lead to confrontation. When Prophet Yusuf A.S. turned away from temptation, he stepped into another trial, one even more painful than private pressure. Public accusation. The moment the doors opened, the narrative shifted. What had been a hidden moral victory became a visible social scandal. Falsehood often reacts violently when exposed. Rather than accepting rejection, the accusation was reversed. Yusuf A.S. was blamed. His integrity was questioned. In societies built on hierarchy and reputation, power frequently shapes perception. She held influence. He was a servant. The imbalance was clear. In such circumstances, truth does not always speak the loudest. It struggles to be heard. For Yusuf A.S., this was a second test layered upon the first. It is one thing to resist sin privately. It is another to endure injustice publicly. He could have defended himself aggressively. He could have responded with anger, yet restraint remained his shield. The calmness that guarded him in the chamber guarded him again in accusation. The Quranic narrative shows that evidence eventually emerged to clarify the situation. A sign was presented that indicated the direction of truth. Even then, however, social pressure did not disappear. Whispers spread among the elite. Gossip replaced facts. Curiosity replaced fairness. The incident became the talk of the city. Reputation hung in delicate balance. Injustice has a particular sting when it follows obedience. When someone sacrifices immediate comfort for the sake of Allah, there is a natural human expectation of ease. But divine wisdom does not always grant ease immediately. Sometimes Allah allows the test to extend so that character shines brighter. The pressure intensified. To silence scandal and contain embarrassment, imprisonment was proposed. Imagine the weight of that moment. Yusuf, A.S., had done nothing wrong. He had chosen purity over pleasure, loyalty over betrayal. Yet now he faces confinement. Freedom would be replaced by chains. Space would be replaced by walls. This is where faith deepens beyond surface belief. It is easy to trust Allah when obedience brings comfort. It is harder to trust Him when obedience brings hardship. Yet Yusuf, A.S., understood something profound. The measure of success is not an immediate outcome. It is alignment with Allah. When prison became the alternative to compromise, he preferred prison. This preference reveals the depth of his conviction. Physical confinement was lighter to him than spiritual corruption. A locked cell was safer than a compromised soul. In a world obsessed with image and status, he chose integrity over reputation. Prison is often perceived as a loss. For Yusuf, A.S., it became protection. It shielded him from further pressure. It removed him from an environment of manipulation. What appeared to society as disgrace became, in divine planning, preservation. Allah does not waste the patience of those who remain firm. Inside the prison walls, another chapter would unfold, one that would elevate him beyond anything the palace could have offered. But that elevation began with injustice. It began with false accusations. It began with choosing truth, even when truth was punished. This is the paradox of faith. Sometimes standing for righteousness costs you comfort in the present, but secures honor in the future. The world may defend falsehood temporarily, but divine justice unfolds with precision. And from the darkness of a prison cell, Allah's greater plan would begin to reveal itself in ways no one in that palace had foreseen. The story of that night in the palace is not preserved merely as history, it is preserved as a mirror. The doors that closed around Prophet Yusuf, A.S., may belong to another era, but the essence of that test repeats itself in every generation. The settings change, the architecture changes, the pressures change, but the private moment of choice remains. Today, temptation does not always stand in a palace chamber. Sometimes it glows from a screen in a dark room. Sometimes it arrives through messages no one else can see. Sometimes it hides behind anonymity and distance. The modern world has created countless closed doors, digital spaces, private conversations, silent compromises. In those spaces, the same question rises: who are you when no one is watching? Like Yusuf, A.S., many people face moments where refusal carries cost. It may cost popularity, opportunity, comfort, or approval. It may invite misunderstanding. It may even bring temporary loss. That small secrecy is harmless, that no one will know. But faith reframes the entire equation. The believer understands that privacy does not erase accountability. The absence of witnesses does not erase records. Allah sees what is hidden and knows what is concealed in the heart. This awareness does not suffocate, it protects. It transforms isolation into strength. It turns a closed door into an open connection with the divine. Yusuf, A.S., teaches that righteousness is not proven in grand declarations alone. It is proven by quiet refusals. It is proven by moments when the heart chooses Allah over impulse. His story reminds us that true honor is not built on what people think of us, but on what Allah knows about us. There may be consequences for choosing integrity. There may be misunderstandings, there may be temporary setbacks, yet the long arc of divine justice bends toward elevation. The same Lord who saw Yusuf, A.S., in the well, in the palace, and in the prison, sees every hidden struggle today. No sincere resistance goes unnoticed. The closed doors of our time are tests disguised as privacy. Within them lies the opportunity to rise in rank without anyone applauding. Within them lies the chance to write a legacy unseen by people, but recorded by angels. The question is not whether temptation will come. It will. The question is what will anchor us when it does. If our hearts are anchored in awareness of Allah, then even the most silent rooms become spaces of victory. Behind every closed door stands a choice, and in that choice lies the difference between momentary secrecy and eternal honor.